A former U.S. ambassador to the UN and South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley is expected to officially announce her bid for the White House on February 15th. And this comes as the 2024 GOP presidential primaries are starting to take shape and more candidates are considering entering the race. So here now to discuss the 2024 landscape as it stands right now, it's pretty early, our CBS News political analyst and Republican strategist Leslie Sanchez and CBS News political contributor and Democratic strategist Joel Payne. Nice to see you guys again. I mean, it is kind of early days, but let's get into it, right? So Nikki Haley, perhaps donning that white suit that we saw so frequently during the last political campaign, she once said that she would not run for president if Donald Trump was also going to be in the race. So clearly something has changed. What changed?
Political dynamics have changed. I mean, if you're watching the news and looking, kind of put the finger to the wind, there's a lot of friction within the Republican Party when it comes to thinking about the next leader, especially nominee for 2024. While many people are still very supportive of the former president, there are going to be a lot of Republicans, including Republican governors, former governors, who America has this love affair with governors traditionally, who will be putting their hat in the ring and trying to see if they've got enough support. And what does that support look like, Anne-Marie? It's going to be fundraising money and also kind of building that national momentum. It's great to talk. Putting one together is a significantly difficult task.
So you're dropping out a little bit. So we just want people to know if they are listening to you, it's you, it's not them.
Okay, Joel, let me ask you, are the Democrats confident that President Biden is going to run for re-election again? And will these revelations around the classified documents have any impact?
Well, you know, President Biden has repeatedly said that he plans to run for president. There's no reason to believe that he wouldn't, unless something unforeseen were to happen. You know, I think the president has a pretty good case to take to the American people for another 4 years. And you can see actually that his team is somewhat mobilizing into re-election mode. You've got a new chief of staff in place.
Is off.
You've got some new key economic staff that are stepping into place. And I think you're actually next week at the State of the Union going to see the president really make a case for why he deserves a second term. He's going to talk about the successes of those first 2 years and going to talk about a plan for the next 2 years. So I don't think any Democrat of note is really itching for Joe Biden to get out of the race. I think tons of Democrats are actually really excited. I know the polling numbers might not reflect that, but polling numbers in February of 2023 probably should not be the final decider of what's going to happen, 22 months from now.
All right, Joel, let me ask you another question. A while back, there was talk about rearranging the primary schedule. So the DNC is going to be voting this week about that. What are the implications of a potential change when it comes to the Democratic Party?
Yeah, look, it's very much still in flux. I think with the president's intentionality by somewhat putting his thumb on the scale for a state like South Carolina coming earlier is to reflect the changing demographics of the Democratic primary field, but also just the Democratic constituency. The previous arrangement where you had states like Iowa and New Hampshire going early and states that are more diverse like Nevada and South Carolina going a little bit later is those diverse communities in the Democratic, constituency base kind of got second billing. I think, now if you have a state like South Carolina going a little bit earlier, you have Black voters having a chance to have more of a voice earlier. By the way, President Biden has a lot of his political fortunes from the last few years to thank towards African-American voters. So I think that's why you've seen that change as I have a frog in my throat. Sorry about that.
We're having all kinds of audio problems, like organic and inorganic.
Leslie, back on the GOP, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis is being touted as a potential nominee, and it seems like all the talk is about him right now. He has a lot of popularity in Florida, but how do you think he will play nationally?
He also has a very large war chest, which is an important point to think about. I think there's still a lot of question marks around Governor DeSantis nationally when it comes to Trump supporters. There are many who feel that it is time to have a new generation of leadership, very much what Nikki Haley's talking about, but they are suspicious of Governor DeSantis. They need to get to know him better. So there is opportunity there, but there is no leading contender that can really put distance between themselves and Trump right now. at this time.
I want to ask you another question about his sort of national appeal, because part of the reason that he's a national name is because of some really controversial stances that he's taken on, what should be taught in schools, what to do with migrants, busing migrants or sending migrants to New York City. I mean, does that have broad appeal beyond, people who would have supported Donald Trump?
Those are really high marks for, I would say, primary Republican voters. They give him high check marks on those things. We also have to look at the fact that the governor did extremely well in a post-COVID environment. He got the state moving again. He helped and supported small businesses. He removed a lot of restrictions that they felt limited their personal freedoms. Those were the kind of things that both Republicans, independents, even Democrats liked about the state of Florida. And that giving that responsibility back to the parents and business owners and just individual citizens, protecting those freedoms is going to be part of this conversation in 2024. And it's part of his reform-oriented agenda that people like the appeal of on a national level.
And for you both briefly, how do Republican and Democratic strategies differ as we head into this next election?
Well, if I could maybe take a little bit of a difference with my friend Leslie on DeSantis. I think these culture wars that Republicans are fighting have already shown to kind of blow up in their face. I think it's a good reason why Donald Trump started to become radioactive in recent years. And actually, if Ron DeSantis thinks that not teaching Maya Angelou, Toni Morrison, and Martin Luther King in schools is popular, not just with African-American voters, but with mainstream voters in the middle who Republicans have been losing, suburban voters, people who care about educating their children, I think he's got another thing coming. So I actually think that's a dangerous third rail that Republicans are playing with, and I'd be careful about that. Obviously, it's a political strategy. Clearly, it's something that he and his team strategically want to do. I don't think it's a particularly wise one.
All right. For today, we're going to have to leave it there. Leslie Sanchez, Joel Payne, thank you both. Appreciate you joining us today.